The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me. Everything you think you know about evil is wrong. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. And we're going to continue on with 1947, the year. And I'm just going to begin by recapping everything that we've discussed so far. So, number one, 1947 has the Roswell incident, which is really the beginning of the UFO narrative. Okay? This is what begins it. This is what plants the seed in the human imagination. And 20 years after that, we start going into space. Now, as I'm sitting here thinking, you could make the case that maybe Orson Welles and H.G. Wells, the writer, seeded the space idea. I mean, Orson Welles did his War of the Worlds broadcast on radio and convinced numerous people in the United States that it was being invaded by extraterrestrials. This really happened. It's an event. And also, one of the first events to fully demonstrate the power of public media for control of the human mind and for the creation of chaos. Very interesting thing to note. We'll get to the video in a sec and go full screen. I'm really enjoying this OBS and learning how to stream properly and everything. It's absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to start doing a lot more of it and just being casual and covering the things that I want to cover. So again, we're going over my book, The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me, which is in some ways a very personal story about my upbringing and the last four generations of my family, you know, my grandfathers to my son, four generations, and that's about 120 years. You know, so my grandfathers were born around 1900. They died in the 60s, late 60s, and then my son was born in 1997, at the end of the 20th century. It's interesting how that works because they peg a generation at about 33 years, and it's actually fairly accurate if you look at a family in the last couple hundred years. And if what I'm suggesting about society is correct, you see it inside the family as well. At least those societies that are going along with the trajectory of the scientific revolution, the industrialization and illumination of the Western world, the mass communications that begin with the dislocated voice of the radio, and the combustion engine transported to the automobile, giving freedom of movement to people. So these are the three principal ideas that define the 20th century. Illumination at night, okay, because before that there were just, I mean, you look at old pictures of London, was basically just gas lamps, right? It wasn't electrical, and whale oil was a huge thing back then. We were killing all the whales, which is, if you know anything about whales and these other sea mammals like dolphins, the intelligence is in some ways beyond human, right? They can't communicate like us and things like that. But we human beings, because we're so expressive and so egotistical, we've basically patented what we think intelligence is, and we're the most intelligent thing on the planet. It's true. I'm not going to contradict that. The human form is the ultimate form of expression on this earth. Okay? Native to this earth. Okay? The human body, what goes into the body, is another thing, because at that level, we're not all from. In fact, I'm not sure any of us are from this earth. Okay? So, but the moment you take a body, you can tap into it, because the cells of this body are built with the same elemental structure as everything else in the world. Okay? And This is a second kind of extended memory. People talk about the Akashic records and seeing your past lives and things like this. But there's another level of consciousness in the body that's just really cellular. And you can tap into it and access the information because it's a record of everything that's come about on this planet. So rapid transportation, illumination at night, and the dislocated voice. And so we go from the automobile to the jet and high-speed rail, which are the advancements of rapid transport. And remember, previous to that, there was bicycles and horses. Now, trains existed, but you couldn't go anywhere you wanted on a train. You could only go where the train had set up the lines and get off at a train station, right? So that's the way it worked. Now, a car liberated people significantly more. Illuminating the cities at night created a 24-hour economy. For those of you who listen to me who've ever lived in an Asian city like Taipei or Shanghai or Tokyo, what you'll know about the Chinese society is it never sleeps. There are as many people out doing their thing at 4 o'clock in the morning as there are at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like the entire society functions in 2 or 3 shifts, 3 8-hour shifts or two 12-hour shifts. And it never really stops. It never really slows down. Now, I imagine there wasn't a whole lot of nighttime activity prior to the illumination of cities at night. Now, there can be no denying that the world we live in is a product of Western consciousness. Illumination of cities, rapid transportation, and dislocated voice. Okay? And dislocated voice goes all the way to me podcasting now. This is an extension of the radio that came out in the early 1900s. And people would sit around the farmhouse and listen to a radio show on a Saturday night. That was high entertainment 120 years ago, 115 years ago. Remember, the TV hadn't been invented. The movie industry wasn't really taking off. They hadn't built all the cinemas, okay? So you think of all the stuff that went into the 20th century that is unique to the 20th century as it pertains to the ability of a centralized authority to communicate with an individual consciousness. This is really what the 20th century is about. It is about mass communication, and subsequent to the realization of the power of mass communication, it is about mass hypnosis and mass mind control. Okay? So those are the 3 things that define the 20th century. Now, we're talking about 1947, which is where the principal themes of the 20th century come into focus, okay? And one is Roswell begins the space narrative and the belief in life from other planets. Whether you believe that or not is irrelevant to me. I do believe it happens. The interdimensionals are also accurate. And then there are other things. There are literally too many things to list once you get into this topic. There's no point. Okay? So anybody who comes along and they're blanketing all forms of phenomenon with a single label, like that's demonology. Well, that's an example of how religion contracts consciousness. Because we were created to be an experiential being. We thrive on experience. This is what a human being is here for. Experience. Nothing more, nothing less. Experience. So why would you have a barrier on experience? Okay? So, probably because it's an easy way to control people. So there were control systems before the 20th century, but the reason they're letting go of the religious control system in the West is because they have a new, more efficient control system. And it's the same forces and the same principalities and the same societies, micro-societies, that have been involved in mind control since the beginning. Okay? since the beginning of this whole thing. Let's go back 2,000 years to the time of Christ. Okay? Anyways, let's take another look at Cynthia Crawford, because this is extremely interesting. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself because there's a lot more in the 1947 chapter that we're going to get into. The CIA was created. The National Security Act was written in 1947. And if you've never taken the time to read the National Security Act, you should. Because everybody thinking that Julian Assange and Snowden are revealing to us the beginnings of a police state that we're living in. No, the police state started in 1947. Read the National Security Act. Okay? It's just they're exercising their franchise on it now. And they do this a lot. Like, a lot of times they will change the law, and the courts won't rule on that law change for a decade and a half, and 2 decades, even though the law's already been secretly changed. They do this all the time. There's a fellow going around now, a former hedge fund manager or a former Wall Street trader, who wrote a book, The Great Taking or something like that, explaining how the Universal Commercial Code was changed in the 80s. So the actual owner of something, like you think you're the owner of your bank in a savings or a checking account. You're not. Okay? The secured creditors of the bank, meaning the shareholders, have more legal right now to your money in a crisis than you do. Okay? And they did this all sort of secretly. You can look that up. There's a bunch of people doing podcasts on it now. But the reason I'm bringing it up right now is to give you an example of, they changed the law, but they haven't really enforced it yet. Okay? So it changed in the 80s, which is like 45 years ago. Or 40 years ago. But they haven't really exercised the franchise yet, begun to take things away from people. Now they're going to. Okay? And now, to further underwrite this, in 2015, they wrote the bail-in legislation. It came into Canada in 2015 when Justin Trudeau came in his first year of office. Okay? The United States has something like it. Every IMF partner country has bail-in legislation. Okay? Now, you don't write something like that unless you're planning to use it. Okay? So when are they going to use it? And if you don't know what a bail-in is, it's when a financial institution gets into trouble, they have the legal right to seize the assets of all the depositors. So they can literally seize your assets. So if you have $100,000 in the bank, you go to get money one day, you can't access your money. The bank has taken it under a bail-in. I know. It sounds like a dystopian novel, but this is really going on. Okay? So North America was founded, for the most part, the United States more so than Canada and more so than Mexico, on the idea of property ownership, which was a huge bone of contention in the original colonizers who came from Europe, who left Europe. And remember, that was a very dangerous journey. Not everybody made it across the ocean on those boats. There was a significant death rate. I don't want to be hyperbolic and exaggerate here, but I think it was somewhere around a third, like 1 in 3 people who got on the boats would not make the voyage across the Atlantic. They would fall sick and die and be buried at sea. So this was a very, very risky prospect, right? Plus, there was no communication back then. I mean, you could maybe pass letters 3-4 times a year to your people back home in Ireland or Scotland or Britain or France if you're Canadian. When the boats come in, you get some mail. But to get on a boat, to go across an ocean, and to go to a land that had this rumor and whisper of this extremely mysterious place, replete with people of no discernible civilization from a Western perspective. So no architecture, no masons, no stonework, okay? no water irrigation the way it was being done in Europe. If you go and look at Amsterdam back then, they had all the channels and canals worked out for shipping and everything. People not living in large cities and distributing specified tasks to people. Okay, you're a baker, you're a cobbler. England with the guilds, okay, which I cover in the Worshipful Fueler chapters in The Devil in Us, if you've read that. Okay, so they get to North America, and all of this exploration, by the way, happens at a time, very coincidentally, when the Kabbalah had begun being shared in Europe. So they started sharing the Kabbalah about 400 years ago. Previous to that, only Jews could study it. You had to be 40 years old, you had to be married, and you had to be morally literate in the Torah before you could go on to the advanced studying of the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is accessible to anyone now. They've opened it up to anybody. But I bring that up because at every stage of this journey, there has been a tremendous collusion, cooperation, and conflation of Judeo-Christian ambition. Now, the rabbis today, if you listen to them on BitChute, on YouTube, on Rumble, most of the Israeli rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis, are calling for the destruction of Christianity, which they consider to be the descendant of Rome, their ancient enemy, and the Jews have an entire liturgy on debt and sin and interest. Why do you think we're living in a Jewish world now? Why do you think the world is the way it is? It's Jewish law. Okay? Now, is Jewish law morally correct and spiritually correct? If you were to look at it through the lens of artificial intelligence, the answer might be yes. If you were to look at it through the lens of the human heart, the answer is certainly no. Okay? But these religious institutions, the Jewish religious culture in Europe, which may have seemed disorganized, but it wasn't. Okay? And the Christian culture, both Catholic and Protestantism, were like Siamese twins all through the colonization, all through the slavery, all through everything. Now that should be abundantly clear to anybody who's perused the Talmud or the Torah, which, let's be honest, are extremely racist. Okay? Now, Christianity extends the covenant to everybody else, not just ethnic Jews, which I think is what the Jews hate about it so much. But Christians became the useful idiots of the expansion of Jewish monotheism, which is, in my opinion, the most savage, the most corrupt, and the most destructive religion ever to grace this planet. Ever. Ever. Okay? It is absolutely hell-bent, intergenerationally hell-bent on world domination. Now, one of the biggest issues people have with what they perceive to be conspiracy theory is the projection of a negative agenda beyond the appetites of an individual human being. So everybody can understand completely corrupt human beings. We have them in the world right now, so you can actually see them, you don't have to imagine them. Okay? It's a death sentence for having a dusty picture of Kim Jong-un on your wall in North Korea. If the special police show up to inspect your house and they go over your picture with a white glove and any dust comes off, death sentence. The Korean people are led to believe that Kim Jong-un does not urinate or defecate. Okay? So what my point is, we can all understand the madness of an individual consciousness. And our history always allocates madness to individuality. And why does it do that? Well, I would suggest it does that because it doesn't want people to contemplate intergenerational evil. That evil plans and evil agendas can be passed like a relay race baton from one generation to another. Okay? Now, who would have the ability to execute intergenerational plans? Well, the most suitable people to do it would be religious institutions. This would be the Vatican, the Lutherans, the Mormons, any religious institution. Okay? Because what indoctrination through the study of holy texts does, okay? Now, don't get me wrong. At times, I get messages from people say, hey, Bruce, are you an atheist? No. No, I absolutely believe in God, okay? But I believe God is pursued independent of mental study for the most part. And I contradict this in my own life by having a fetish for reading holy books. So I stand a hypocrite before you. I mean, I've read everything, the Upanishads, the entire Taoist canon, the Japji of Sikhism, the Zohar, the King James Bible, the Catholic Bible, the Nag Hammadi Library, the highly ham-fisted, redacted, and completely illegitimate Dead Sea Scrolls, the initiatory texts for Voodoo, Santeria, Paolo Mayombe. Like, this has been my life passion, the way some people go at NHL hockey or NFL football, okay? But the bulk of your spiritual growth is going to come in the exercises you do. Okay? Spirituality is like going to the gym. Do you want to be the guy who just reads books about going to the gym and working out and can speak like an expert? Oh, this is how you do this, but he's never done it? Or do you want to be the guy who goes to the gym and actually does it and after 5 years has a remarkable physique or she has a remarkable physique? Okay? It's the same thing with religion. We get the pundits in every religion. Okay? So you get the people who speak about the scriptures, and then you get the true practitioners. Okay? So in the Vatican, all the cardinals, all of the people who contribute to the Catechism, which is the ongoing body of law that defines the Catholic theology, they would all be pundits. Somebody like Padre Pio or Francis of Assisi, they would be the real deal. In Hinduism, the people who are studying the Vedic scriptures and commenting on them, they're the pundits. Okay? The highest practitioners of the Vedic practices, the ones in the Himalayas, many of them are illiterate and have never learned to read. Their parents give them to forest monks. They're initiated and trained, and they become completely enlightened. And many of them live 100, 200, 300, 400 years old. This is going on the planet right now. Right now, as I'm talking to you, there are 300-year-old people living in the Himalaya mountains in the contemplative tradition of that region. And yet, we're going to war over some miracles some Jewish guy did 2,000 years ago. It's insanity. Getting back to point. So the religious institutions are the seeding grounds for intergenerational planning because they're the only ideological structures that keep replacing themselves, that don't die with a single pope or a single cardinal or a single high rabbi or a single imam. They just keep contributing through the commentary to the body of this knowledge, and what forms is a social agenda for the people, dictated by the religious. Everybody's got one. The Vatican's got one. The only ones who are being somewhat effective in the implementation of their intergenerational plan, by my observations, are the Jews. Okay, because we are this close to the Third Temple of Solomon. I think they may break ground before the end of 2024. And it'll be a very interesting thing to see, right? I'm not against it. I think, look, every toll and tariff that could be possibly paid to get that temple built has been paid. There is no lawful reason to deny them that temple. Islam has numerous holy sites. You could easily let go of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay? So, and I'm not even a huge fan of Jews. All right? I don't. What's that great Henry Bukowski line? I don't hate people. I just seem to feel better when they're not around. That's my relationship with Jews. I don't hate them. I just feel better when they're not around, and I'm not being pummeled with their ideology and theology, which is all over American media now as we go through these campus things. Anyways, this is turning into more of a walkabout podcast than it is any kind of meaningful continuation. So this is an episode of Weird or What on the History Channel, kind of an ancillary program to Ancient Aliens. It's hosted by none other than William Shatner, Captain Kirk himself, and it's an interview. This is a talking interview with Cynthia Crawford. So we're gonna give this a listen.
There are no tests for alien DNA because they've never had aliens that they've been able to get DNA swabs from.
Could Cynthia have alien DNA after all? Is she the victim of a sinister alien abduction? Or was she the target of a top-secret intelligence gathering operation? Whatever the truth, this story is 100% weird. Or what?
Is that all they do? Yeah, that's all they do. So there's a reference, and Cynthia wanted her DNA tested, but they wouldn't do it because they don't want you knowing that there's alien hybrids on the planet, right? Because it breaks they've put so much time and effort into mentally boxing you in with theology. Why would they want to ruin that now? Okay? The simple rule is this: you are not going to know anything until you figure it out yourself. That's true of society, politics, economics, religion, God. You're not going to know anything you don't figure out yourself. You can get helped by other people. You can read people who move and inspire you. There's no doubt about that. You can sit with a high practitioner of a religious or spiritual tradition and gain some of their essence and energy, which is very important. It's like fertilizer for somebody who's beginning a contemplative journey. They call it, in the Eastern past, they call it transmission, okay? A number of years ago, the Dalai Lama was in Toronto, and he did what was called the Kali Chakra initiation, and he did it on 20,000 people at the same time. Right? So it's a transmission of energy. It happens at the invisible level. Okay? So there's the visible and there's the invisible. So there you go. So Cynthia Crawford was a very, very interesting person, and one of the narratives that begins in And one of the narratives that begins in 1947 as well, because she was created in 47. So isn't that interesting? Okay? You get Roswell, you get Cynthia Crawford, you get the National Security Act, you get all those Nazis coming over in paperclip. What a year 1947 was. Who knew? Who knew? Okay? Near the end of the fourth decade, literally the midpoint of the 21st century, okay, or the 20th century. Absolutely fascinating. Now, we're going to take another thing, and not many of you have made this connection, but maybe if you listen to me a lot, you might have made this connection already. So let's take a look at this. Jews and Arabs clash in Palestine in 1947.
Just reports told of an uneasy calm that followed a week of looting, rioting and arson. A Pathé Dispatch shows the scene in Jerusalem as Jewish and Arab mobs clashed in the center of the city. Men from the Royal Lincolnshire Regiment had to be called in to restore order. all British troops will be withdrawn by May. In the meantime, it is expected that they will move out as soon as possible from Arab and Jewish areas. Authority will be handed over to military forces of the two new states. Both Jews and Arabs have issued general mobilization orders. Jerusalem rioters started fires in many parts of the city. Casualties amount to more than a score killed on both sides. But Palestine's most critical period has yet to come. With British troops away from the Temple Center, it remains to be seen whether a threatened full-scale war will materialize. It will be no peaceful Christmas in the Holy Land.
What a fascinating time 1947 was. Now, history recalls that the formation of Israel was 1948 after the Nakba, but the British armed the Jews, okay? And I suspect trained them as well. And there was probably Rothschild money involved in this as well. And then when the British left in 1948, that's when the Nakba happened. That's when the Jews massacred countless Palestinians. And why did they do that? Well, there's this theory going around, and Netanyahu likes to repeat it a lot, that the idea of the final solution for the Jews in Europe was given to Hitler by the Grand Mufti of Palestine. Okay? So whether that's true or not, what it does is it seeds hatred into the Jewish heart. Okay? Now, to my Jewish brothers and sisters who may watch the Talamanca Review, I'm going to say something to you now you're not going to like. You are one of the most manipulated and abused people on the planet. Okay? Well, you say, Bruce, what are you talking about? There's 15 million Jews on the planet. They probably have a full 25% of the planet's entire wealth in disposable income. So, 15 million people and 8 billion would be what? It's less than 1% of the, way less than 1% of the human population. They're prosperous, they have money, all of these things. Well, for those of you who've actually read The Devil in Us, A Memoir of You and Me, that is the curse. People think curses are bad luck and misfortune. No. A curse is when you're blinded, okay? And material prosperity, America is cursed now, and the curse is coming home to roost, okay? 20 years ago, not a single American did not believe they were the most powerful nation in the world. In 20 short years, you've been brought to your knees. Your food supply is being destroyed. Your culture is being destroyed. Your right to a family and procreation is being destroyed. Your homes are going to be taken away from you. You have massive migration, 45 million people in the last... Since Joe Biden came in, there's like 45 million illegal immigrants in the United States now. They're being funded by non-governmental organizations that are paid by your Treasury fund, by the way, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, it's amazing to me that this story hasn't come out more forcefully, because everybody's talking about the money being given to Israel and the Ukraine. Nobody's talking about the money being given to the NGOs that to resettle all of these illegal immigrants in the United States, who seem to be almost uniformly military-age men. Okay? So 20 years ago, the average American thought they were the most blessed people on the planet. Now the curse is... So you think you're being cursed now and being destroyed. No. What's going on now is the curse is being lifted, and you're seeing your true predicament. And it was hidden from you. Hidden from you. Do you understand? So that's what's going on now. So 1947 was an extraordinary year in so many ways, it isn't even funny. Like, it's just, yeah. So let's take another look at one of these, because they're really worth watching. How Britain broke Palestine. Okay?
When you think Palestine, you may think violence, land seizures, and a decades-long Israeli occupation. But what you might not know is that another country played a driving role in causing the region's conflict: Imperial Britain. From 1516 to at least 1917, Palestine was under the control of the Ottoman Empire, a religiously diverse land where Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived alongside one another at peace for the most part. Then in the early 1900s, a small number of European Jews were trying to drum up support for Zionism and the establishment of a Jewish homeland. Just 20 years before, in 1897, the movement led by Theodor Herzl was initiated at a conference in Switzerland. They decided that they would advocate for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, but the movement at the time didn't have much support. And at the time, only around 8% of the population of Palestine was Jewish. At the same time, Arab nationalism was on the rise and many Palestinians wanted an independent state. Imperial Britain knew of both the ambitions of Zionists and Palestinians and used the situation to bolster their own interests. In 1914, amid World War I, Britain went to war with the Ottoman Empire. And in 1915, Henry McMahon, Britain's representative in Cairo, approached Arab leaders with a proposal. Britain would agree to Arab independence if they helped fight against the Ottomans. Then in 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary wrote a one-paragraph letter to Walter Rothschild, a leading figure in the British Jewish community. It read, "His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object." This letter became known as the Balfour Declaration, and it was in stark contrast to a declaration of the British and French armies in 1918, which assured the people of Syria, Palestine, and Mesopotamia of autonomy. So what was going on? Britain had promised independence to the Arabs that lived in Palestine, but then also promised a homeland for Jews on land that was already inhabited. Was Britain just transferring land that did not belong to them to whoever they liked? When the Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1918, the League of Nations gave Britain a mandate or administrative control of Palestine in 1920. It was a dual mandate. On one hand, they were to act on behalf of Palestinians, but on the other hand, they were to act on behalf of the international community of Jews who wanted to establish a homeland. Britain then drew up arbitrary borders, transferring the eastern bank of the Jordan River to the Hashemites. It was under the British mandate that Jews from Europe began to immigrate to Palestine and buy up land. The Jewish population in Palestine grew tenfold, from 60,000 to more than 600,000 between 1918 and 1947. Many Palestinians saw the mass influx of Jews as a European colonial movement. So as one might expect, it led to conflict. In 1929, riots broke out at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Both Palestinians and Jews lost lives. In 1936, after Jewish immigration increased even more riots broke out. This time, the British were heavy-handed and killed between 2,000 and 5,000 Palestinians. A Royal British Commission concluded that because Britain had allowed mass immigration, Palestine had two distinct societies that couldn't be reconciled. They recommended a partition of the land. The Arab Higher Committee rejected this, saying it was all their land. Britain then banned the Arab Higher Commission. They introduced the White Paper of 1939. It stated that Palestine should be a binational state inhabited by Jews and Palestinians, but that Jewish immigration would be limited for 5 years. But illegal immigration still went on, and violence continued to erupt. And when Britain couldn't handle the mess they had a part in creating, they handed the country back to the UN in 1948. The UN then decided to partition Palestine. The story gets a lot more complicated after this, but the British promising land which already belonged to Palestinians to other people has played a part in decades of conflict and bloodshed.
Fascinating, eh? So the real formation of Israel in terms of giving them the military might was after World War II. There was the British actually, through naval fleets, brought a contingent of very well-trained, militarily well-trained and armed Israelis. Okay? So clearly you can see right from the beginning of this enterprise that the Anglo-American Empire, so after World War II, the torch got passed over to America. The Anglo-American Empire has absolutely favored the Jews throughout this entire enterprise. Now, why is that? Well, probably the largest collection of what I would call righteous Gentiles in the world exist in English society, English being the language, so America and the United Kingdom. Now, what's a righteous Gentile? A righteous Gentile is somebody who studies Judaism and its moral laws. Well, I mean, a righteous Gentile could just be somebody who lives by the laws of God. It could be done unconsciously. Any Jew will tell you that. You know, you could find some guy living in the woods in Siberia and study him for 6 months and go, that's a righteous Gentile. He's not Jewish, but he understands how to live by God's law, natural law. So But what I mean when I say righteous Gentile is somebody versed in the esoterica of Judaism. And the esoterica of Judaism is the Kabbalah. And as is commonly understood now, this was shared 400 years ago. Okay, so it was shared in England. You get this is all, by the way, I cover all of this in the Light of Darkness in the Worshipful Fuelers chapter. Very fascinating chapter, okay? So Freemasonry, which was a speculative order, so they masqueraded themselves as a trade guild, but it was all metaphysics. And they were given a course to study, which had to be prepared by somebody. And if it's Kabbalah, then one would assume it was prepared by rabbis or somebody knowledgeable in the Kabbalah. So you have this infection of Jewish thought in these British who study the Kabbalah. Now, in my opinion, the Kabbalah is an infection. It is not a holy instrument in any way, shape, or form. Okay? I could be wrong. But I look at the results. Okay? This material produces an unusually large number of high-functioning psychopaths. Or it attracts psychopaths, one or the other. Okay? I believe that psychopathology can be induced in a person, that you can make a psychopath. Okay? I don't think it's a genetic disposition psychopathy. There may be a genetic component to it, but, who knows? So this contingent went over in 1947, and when the British left and turned it over to the UN had no peacekeeping forces at that time. The peacekeeping forces were a Canadian invention that came a number of years later. I believe it was one of our prime ministers, Diefenbaker or Pearson, created the UN peacekeeping forces, the Blue Helmets, okay? And so what happened was those highly trained Israelis that had been dropped off in 47 by the British Navy, when the British pulled out, it was just blood and death. Blood and death. Now, to their shame, the Jews have made documentaries about this that are now on Netflix, where they talk about, they're interviewing these guys in their 90s, and these guys are literally bragging about killing Palestinian women and children. Now, these are the same people asking for our sympathy every day now. Okay? Every day. Anyways, I don't want to get distracted by emotion, okay? And in my opinion, just my opinion, these Abrahamic religions are finished. The way they were constructed, the way they were handled, the way they were given to us. Now, it's interesting that the UFO narrative begins in 1947, and it's so prominent now. So, not many people know this. But Billy Meyer, the Palladian contactee, claims in his writings that most of what we call the Abrahamic system has been, let's call it Palladian mentorship. All right? Now, as the UFO movement has evolved, a lot of people have become conscious of who they're connected to spiritually. You can call this a soul family, okay? So that's not our final state. That's not our soul state. But many of the people on this planet now do not originate here, are not part of the original evolutionary process on this planet. They were brought in astral form and were able to incarnate into the physical form on this planet. Now, the physical form has been massively tinkered with genetically, okay? And this has been going on for, well, since almost the beginning of time. If you want to get more into all of this metaphysical history, I highly recommend that you do pick up The Galactic Historian, The World According to Andrew Bartzis, which I authored for him in 2022, I think. Andrew and I don't get along anymore. Things were revealed to me about him as a result of writing the book and people reaching out to me, that I could just not stand beside the man anymore in any kind of moral unity. I wrote a couple Substacks about that. It's also called the Talamanca Review. You can read up on it. But in a sense, Andrew fulfilled his mission. It was the discharge of this massive reading of the planet. And he fulfilled it, okay? He fulfilled it in the book, which is why the moment the book was done, he as an individual social personality in this culture immediately began to fade away. And a lot of his ugliness was revealed. But nonetheless, he really could, at the beginning of his career, when he went public in 2013, he really could read the Akashic Records. He really was psychic, okay? Which I think is a curse. Never, ever develop your psychic abilities, okay? Ever. All you need is divine intuition. You don't need to know what the guy beside you had for breakfast or what he likes to do with his wife in bed. This fetish for psychic ability that human beings have now, it's littered through the New Age movement. This is why so many people are getting into witchcraft and Wiccanism. And these practices are extremely dangerous. Okay? Oh, yeah, I get it. Bruce is sounding like a medieval Catholic friar. Bruce is trying to be part of the conspiracy, shut down our consciousness. No. You want to do it. But don't call me when the grenade blows up in your hand. Okay? Don't call me. I'm not going to bail you out. I'm not going to call any of my friends to bail you out. You're on your own. Okay? It's very, very dangerous, this stuff. And it's really the human equivalent of the way dogs sniff each other's asses. This is the same sort of biological instinct that human beings have to, wanting to see everybody else's secrets and violate their privacy and reading somebody and all of it's ass sniffing. It's like dogs sniffing each other's asses. Don't do it. Don't do it. All you need is divine intuition. And it's much more difficult to stay happy and balanced with your psychic channels open because there's literally too much data coming in. Okay? There's literally too much data coming in. Now, I have a number of friends who can control the opening and closing of the data, and that's acceptable. And many of these people are healers and remarkable people. But for the average human being, if it's not in your incarnation to open psychically, don't force it by doing chakra-specific exercises and all of this sort of stuff. It's just too dangerous. Read some of the stories of sudden Kundalini awakening. Okay? It's a nightmare. And it can go on for years before it finally settles. So, not a good thing at all. So 1947 was an extraordinary year. Roswell, National Security Act, the formation of Israel by the British dropping off the highly militant Jews to finally finish off the Palestinians and square off the land that would be Israel's, okay? All begins in 1947, okay? UFOs, alien human hybrids, and Israel. Remember those three things. Those, just like illumination at night, rapid transport, and dislocated voice take us from the agrarian age into the modern age in cities in the early 1900s, okay? All happens in a very short period of time. And again, I say this all the time on my podcast now. Why can't evolutionary biologists explain this to us? How do we shit in holes in the ground for 2,000 years and in 3 generations go from that to satellites in space and cell phones and everything we have now? How did such a leap forward happen so suddenly? Was all of this stuff just sitting dormant inside of us? Okay, evolutionary biology is complete horseshit. It's the consciousness changing the reality in the organism or changing the organism to suit the reality, because that's how powerful consciousness is, even in its unconscious state, where the organism with the consciousness is not even conscious of what the higher consciousness is doing. Okay? Everything is spiritual at the end of the day. Everything is spiritual. And when you understand that, you no longer see science. Science is magic. It's magic, okay? What is magic? What is a ritual? For those of you who've ever studied serious ritual, okay? Gotten into the Crowley stuff, gotten into serious, complex ritual, okay? What is it? It's a series. It's a series of steps, a sequence with weighted or portioned measures of all ingredients at each proper sequence. Okay? You understand? So that's what a ritual is. You have to do it in a certain sequence. You have to have certain portions of things. Okay? Certain portion of blood, certain portion of salt, all of these sorts of things, okay? When you get into the dark rituals. They're recipes, they're formulas. What is the foundation of the scientific? What does the scientific method produce? It produces formulas that repeat the behavior. Sequence of steps, portioned aspects of, material aspects of the ritual, added in their proper sequence and in their proper portion. Okay? How do you make a Prozac pill? How did they make the vaccine? Through a formula. How did they arrive at the formula? Practice, 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 practice. Get the formula. It's magic. Okay? It's magic. We're going to be finishing up with 1947 fairly soon in the coming podcasts. It is, to my sensibilities, an absolutely pivotal year in human history. And the three things we're living through now are the consequences of the formation of Israel, because they're going for the third temple now. If you don't know that this is all about the third temple, you're just not paying attention. Well, Bruce, the news isn't telling me that. What has the news ever told you? Ever. Nothing. Okay? Extraterrestrials, the Third Temple of Solomon, National Security Act, Cynthia Crawford, alien-human hybrid. Okay? So we'll put Cynthia and Roswell together. And they in the same year. And she was created by an Office of the Strategic Services officer, which became the CIA, by the way. Okay, so the National Security Act converted the OSS to the CIA. So the police state we live in now started in 47. Remember how I told you earlier in this podcast? They put something down on paper, but they don't start to enforce it for a couple decades. And then people say, hey, you can't take my house. Yeah, we can. Here's the law. It was written 25 years ago. You look at the law, you go, oh my God, there is a law. I never really owned my home. That's how they do it. Okay? Lawfare. Okay? Now, remember the chapter on the devil that we went through. And I've said numerous times, and I know people are busy and stuff, my material is very, very dense. It may seem subtle, it may seem colloquial, it may seem cavalier because I show up in a baseball cap and a t-shirt, I'm in an earthbag house. It's very dense. You got to listen to things a few times for the realization to bloom. Because the information isn't going to do it to you. Do it for you. I'm trying to create a realization in you where you suddenly see something and go, oh my God, how did I never see that? That's what all my books are about. Okay? That's what my podcast is about. Unless I go all ballistic on politics, but that's an affectation of getting a journalism degree. I can't help myself. You get a journalism degree, you're a news junkie for your whole life. So, this is the world we live in. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. We'll see you again tomorrow, probably. The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me. Everything you think you know about evil is wrong.